Alrighty, so please look at the camera and introduce yourself with your name, your title, your pronouns, and what song best defines you, but don't explain it.
Oh, wow. Cheryl Wiltshire. I am an attorney, solo owner of the Wiltshire Law Firm LLC. She and Her. And best song. Oh my God. Wow. That's a curveball. I would have to say, because I was listening to it last night, so it's popping into my head. Tina Turner, Simply the Best.
Awesome. That's a great pick. That's a great pick. You're simply the best. Housing court deals mostly with landlords, tenants, and property owners. Could you describe the court to an average Clevelander who may not be familiar with it?
I've been getting that question, so I usually just answer it like this. Housing court hears two types of cases: civil cases where a landlord is attempting to evict a tenant. That's the civil end. And then there's a criminal end. So if you own a property and your garage is falling in and you get a citation from building and housing and you don't make that repair within the time frame that they've given you, and they file a complaint with housing court, that case would be heard in housing court as well. And that would be on the criminal docket. Hope that makes sense.
Perfect. We looked into some of the other interviews you did and saw that you prefer the question, what is wrong with the Cleveland Housing Court that compels you to run, as opposed to why should people elect you? You've cited appellate decisions saying that there's a concerning use of overly punitive community control sanctions, but we'd love to hear more specifics.
For one thing, right now, housing court is issuing blocks on selling properties if the property owners are in court. And I understand the need to do that, but tying up the selling of properties for a prolonged period of time, if there's proof that the owner cannot make the repairs, I think is problematic, and it's not really helping the situation. If you have a legitimate purchaser and that purchaser understands that they will be taking on the property and will be responsible for the repairs, I don't see why we should be tying up sales. Obviously, that purchaser will have to prove that they have the financial wherewithal to make the repairs, because we don't want properties just being sold and sold and sold and sold just to get out of being responsible in housing court. So I think if the structure is that the new owner has the wherewithal and has the proof that they can go ahead and make the repairs, I don't see why we're tying up sales. I went back to housing court in 2022 as a part-time magistrate, and comparing the court at that time to what was happening when I was there under Judge Pianca, the court has significantly changed. And obviously, every court needs to progress. Unfortunately, I felt as though the court had taken aback. One of the things that I was surprised by was the fact that the deputy bailiffs no longer had a union, an affiliation within union. There was a shooting in 2020, and the bailiffs were without union support at the time. And luckily, the prior union stepped in and offered assistance. The court could not offer that assistance. And these young men and women are without that support, and I'm concerned about that. Every day they're going out and they're putting their lives on the line to perform evictions, make sure that evictions go smoothly. And in certain instances, they're being attacked. In that instance, they were shot at. They have to defend themselves. And sometimes they're placed in a situation where there's a question as to whether or not that shooting or that incident was justified? And why should they not have the support that they should have carrying out the duties of housing court? Losing the union costs them the ability to be represented. It's difficult for any individual, even if it was me going out there doing this day to day, watching people being evicted and doing what they're doing. There's a cost there mentally for them. Under the union, they got that kind of support. Without it, they no longer have that support. And I'm concerned for them.
So, as it relates to the seat you're running for, how would you affect their unionization, recognition or non-recognition?
I will give them the opportunity to go ahead and negotiate.
Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Which of these wrongs do you think falls directly at your opponent's feet?
Let me go back a little bit and kind of explain myself. I started in housing court in the early 2000s with the late Raymond Pianca. He was the one that kind of made the court more of an equitable court instead of a mechanism for punishment. I think right now the court's prevailing theme is punishment versus trying to be more equitable and getting owners in a place where they can make the repairs and be in compliance. That's not what's happening now. The court has the ability to refer owners and tenants, if it's a civil situation, a landlord dispute, to resources outside of the court. And back in the early 2000s, back when Judge Pianca was on the bench, he made those referrals. He didn't automatically slam the hammer down on owners or tenants. He gave them the opportunity to avail themselves and other resources. If they didn't do it, they didn't do it. And he went ahead and he administered what needed to be administered. But he gave owners and tenants the opportunities to cure.
So just to be clear,
Yes.
you think that your opponent does not give enough opportunities to the owners and tenants to clear the issues?
Well, in my opinion, if I was the one on the bench, I would do that. I
Definitely.
would afford owners that opportunity.
Definitely.
And tenants, yes.
Okay. And then more on a general sense, in what ways are you distinct from your opponent? What has she done or said that you disagree with?
Going back to the union situation, I would have not terminated that contract with the union to begin with. As far as the day-to-day running of the court, right now, the court has always had housing court specialists, and the court had a clinic where the housing court specialists were available to tenants, owners coming in with questions. The housing court specialists are not attorneys, so they cannot practice law. They cannot give legal advice, but they had the information and institutional knowledge to help people. Right now, the housing court specialists are basically just handing out telephone numbers and saying, call this entity and try to get the help that they need. There's no follow-up. There's no real training for the housing court specialists to do what they used to do in the past, and that was assisting the public. I would like to see that department go back to that. The other thing is, when I talk about institutional knowledge, the prior housing court specialist, the one with that knowledge, they are no longer with the court. In 2020, when my opponent took the bench, a lot of that staff had to leave. And along with them went that knowledge. And so I'm not saying that the housing court specialists that we have now aren't good, but I think that there should be more being done to get them trained and availing them with the resources out there that they can properly give that information and help our owners, our tenants.
Let's take a look at your website. You list a number of improvements that you'd like to make to the housing court, including restoring relationships with local organizations, improving the efficiency of the court, engaging the community better, improving access to the housing court. Which would be the first project that you try to tackle, and what specific steps would you take to accomplish it?
First, I want to get the court back out into the community. One of the things that I would like to set up is having at least 1 or 2 housing court specialists in each ward once a month. We're going from 17 to 15 wards. And if we could set up a specialist at maybe a rec center or community center once a month, let people know that that specialist will be there to answer questions, whether it's landlord-tenant issues or something to do with code enforcement, without giving legal advice, but being able to guide people. Right now, the court usually have these clinics in the neighborhoods where they hand out information, and that's fine. But sometimes people don't want to attend those things because they're not getting one-on-one attention. But if they know that someone is going to be physically there, they're going to dedicate the time to them, I think they'll be more apt to come out and talk and get information. The late Judge Pianka used to issue a newsletter for people who couldn't get out or didn't want to go out. That information coming to their mailbox was really, really helpful. And I would like to go back to issuing that newsletter. As far as access to the court, the General Division of Cleveland Muni started electronic filing some time ago. Other courts do it. I practice a lot in domestic relations and juvenile court, and we do electronic filing. With landlord-tenant, especially on the civil end, a lot of the attorneys file in bulk. So right now there's no electronic filing. The attorneys have to trek down to the Justice Center and stand there and file. I would like for housing court to move towards electronic filing. One of the things that I think the Supreme Court has issued a mandate requiring that electronic filing begin, I think, January of 2026. So with that mandate in place, it will happen, but just get it done. Attorneys should be allowed to electronically file, and even any individual who wants to file something, they should be able to sit at home and set that up and file if they can. Not everyone have access to a computer and can do that, but I think having it available is a wonderful thing. The other thing I would like to tackle is the turnover rate in housing court for employees. It's extremely high, and I'm concerned that rotating out employees doesn't mean that the court is running efficiently. If you're constantly concentrating of having to bring new employees in, get them trained, and get them up to speed. So one of the things I would like to do is to tackle that. And first by letting people know that I'm going to listen to what you have to say, because the staff is on the front line. As the judge, I'm not. I have to keep myself, a line between myself technically and the public. So listening to the staff, listening to what they're suggesting, I think is one of the things that needs to be done to keep people on board. If they don't feel like they're part of the team, they're not going to want to stay. Something as basic as treating people with dignity and respect, I think is very, very, very important. And it should be at the forefront of everything that we as jurists do.
Is there anything to indicate that your opponent currently does not treat the staff with respect or dignity?
This is what I want to do.
Okay.
What she's doing, yes.
I understand. A couple quick follow-ups. So you mentioned that you wanted to send out people into each ward
Mhm.
to have one-on-one time.
Mhm.
That sounds like a great idea, a good way to inform the public. Is there a budgetary concern with, I assume, what would be the extra hours?
Yes, absolutely. Sending housing court specialists obviously out would be during work hours.
Gotcha.
In February of this year, when my opponent went before the city council to discuss the court's budget, it was noted that funds were being returned. That money should be used to educate us all. And if I have to use that money to do that, I'm going to do that. I understand that city council may be, happy to get some money returned, but there are things that we need to do in the community. There are things that housing court can do in the community. So spend that money.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And then the last follow-up is you were talking about office culture, retention, turnover.
Mhm.
I think a lot of working class, everyday Clevelanders have this understanding that a lot of jobs these days just don't pay enough to make rent.
Mhm.
Do you think that adjusting staffers' pay would be something within your purview?
Oh, absolutely. One of the interesting things about housing court, it's part of Cleveland Muni, but it's a separate division and it has its own budget separate from Cleveland Muni. And so the judge for Cleveland Housing Court has the ability to adjust income for staff. And that's one of the great things about that court. The other thing is used to be that the court employed 60, 65 employees. I don't think that the numbers are that high anymore. So there's room to bring people in. There's room to create additional sources of income for people. One of the things that I would like to do is set up an ADR department to have mediators, not just one mediator, to get them trained. I would like to possibly look into working with the Cleveland Mediation to see if they could help train mediators. One of the great things about housing court is that it affords landlords and tenants who are fighting, having disputes, to mediate. But unfortunately, the docket is such that you have one mediator, and if you have 4 cases that needs to be mediated, the parties have to sit and wait. We don't want people waiting around. So having more than one mediator would be helpful. The other thing I would also like to do is to have owners who are filing landlord tenant cases is for them to upfront indicate to the court whether they're willing to mediate. So when they file the paperwork, there should be some kind of a form there that says, ask, are you willing to mediate? Is this the type of case that you think can mediate? So that we can automatically shift the case to being mediated before we even get to court.
So, according to the most recent census data, the majority of Clevelanders are tenants renting from landlords, and it's no secret that rent has been exploding over the past few years, while apartment conditions tend to stagnate or decrease. As the renting market continues to be dominated by rental companies, how will you use your direct authority and indirect influence to help everyday Clevelanders?
Wow. I think that part of the problem, from what I'm hearing as I'm out and about, is that a lot of owners don't feel that when they file an eviction, the path to getting their properties back is easy. And I understand that. The court still has a role to play, though, to make sure that the playing field is level, to make sure that the owners are doing the right thing in bringing in a case, and to make sure that the tenants are treated fairly. Right now, the court has a program called Right to Counsel, and that was something that was created by city council implemented. And it's a great program because tenants are given the opportunity, if they meet certain requirements, to avail themselves with an attorney through legal aid. If the tenants qualify, they would be represented, and in some instances, the attorney for the tenant and the attorney for the owner can work together and work out a plan. Whether it means that the tenant stays in the property or the tenant leaves, they work things out. Lately, I think because owners are concerned about what's going to happen if they file a complaint in housing court, a lot of owners are seeking self-help. That is a problem. How do we fix that? We let owners know that when they come in, when they file, they will be treated fairly. But at the same time, we still have to make sure that they've done the right thing by the tenant. Because sometimes there are claims on both sides, right? As far as the high cost, I think, so judges have no control over that in terms of rents. But we can make it so that owners and tenants, when they come into court, are treated fairly and they understand the process. That's as much as we can do. One of the things that concern me in terms of the skyrocketing costs is the length of time that it's taking to deal with these disputes in court. And two, landlords seeking self-help instead of coming to court. There has to be ways for us to curtail that. And I think one of the things that the judge can do is to make it clear to owners and tenants is that the court will apply the law to the facts of the case. Not every case is going to be treated the same. But that's as far as a judge can go in terms of what's happening out there right now with costs.
And when it comes to the phrase self-help, could you explain what that means a little to a viewer who might not know?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. If a landlord isn't getting the rent that they're supposed to, some landlords would seek self-help by just going in and removing all the property, putting up a curb, and changing the locks. That's self-help, and that's not allowed.
The incumbent, Judge Scott, has already taken substantial steps to prove that she's pro-tenant. Why should voters choose you?
I have to say this, that in 2020, I think, City Council passed legislation that created the Right to Counsel program. The Right to Counsel program finally gave tenants not only counsel, but a voice that some tenants did not have before. And so it created this scenario where tenants are finally being represented, they're finally being heard. So that's pushing this tenant movement, which rightfully so. We needed it and we have it. Now, whether or not that's because the incumbent is pro-tenant, I don't know. But I think that the fact that City Council created this legislation, it's being used, I think that's what's helping the tenant movement move forward.
Almost 10% of Cleveland proper is owned by the land bank. With poverty at all ages rising in Cleveland, especially since 2021, would you support building good, affordable public housing on these parcels?
I don't think that I can answer that.
Okay.
I don't think that that's within my wheelhouse as a judicial candidate. I will say this, though, that Cleveland has an abundance of older homes that just need to be repaired and brought up to code. This property, I think, was built in the early 1900s. And so bringing this property back to life for a tenant like me, there's a tenant upstairs, I think is a wonderful thing. I do think that we do need some newer housing, but passing judgment on that, I don't think that's within my wheelhouse, and I don't think I have enough information to pass judgment on that.
Housing court, as we've said, handles evictions.
Yeah.
For average people, an eviction is a traumatic and difficult process, which is usually related to the loss of a job, extreme change of income, or other life-altering events. What will you do to mitigate the effects of evictions and, if possible, evictions in general?
Well, like we talked about mediation, and during COVID, there were monies available for tenants to tap into. A lot of that money may have dried up, but there's still monies available to help people. We just need to know where to look. So I think that availing people, giving them the information to let them know, hey, there's money here, there's money here, there's money here that you can tap into. You need to just apply. And that goes back to what I said before about having staff in housing court that knows the direction to point people into to get the help that they need. The other thing is to, like I said before, looking at evictions as each case being a separate case, because what's happening in this case between A, B, and C and landlord and tenant Smith may not be the same as the other case over here. So being diligent enough as a magistrate, as a judge, and allowing parties to not only mediate, giving them the opportunity to mediate, and giving them the opportunity to look for resources to either stop the eviction or to make it so that if the tenant has to leave, the tenant has a place to go or resources to tap into.
Definitely. And so you've brought up mediation a number of times now. Could you sort of tell us why mediation is the solution that you're posing it to be?
It's one of the solutions, because when I was a magistrate in housing court, I was on the civil docket, and I would ask, would you be willing to mediate? And some of the landlords were willing to do that, and the parties would come to agreements. Sometimes the tenant would have to leave, but the agreement will be structured so that the tenant had time to leave. And if the tenant wanted to stay, they could enter into a payment plan to stay. But they have the opportunity to negotiate in mediation. So that's why I think the mediation program is so important. It just needs to be expanded a bit, but it's very, very, very important to the court.
And I think, just to put a fine nail on it, risk beating a dead horse. So the options available in mediation to come to an agreement before, would it be a magistrate? Would it be?
Well, once the complaint is filed, it's set for hearing, you come in and you're before the magistrate. As a magistrate, you can ask the owner, are you willing to mediate this case? And sometimes they say yes, sometimes they say no. So at that time, I, as the magistrate, can't participate in that mediation process. So what will happen is we'll shift the case over, and that docket is being done by Zoom. So we would put the parties in a breakout room with the mediator, and the mediator would go ahead and work with the parties to come to an agreement.
And this is different than the normal proceeding of the civil housing court process. How?
It is part of it. It's
Right.
not completely separate. So parties come in for hearing. And like I said, if you ask the owner, would you be willing to mediate? Yes. So we would schlep the tenant and the owner into a breakout room to talk. That's by Zoom. If the first cause docket was in person, what would happen is, before the magistrate would even take the bench, the bailiff would have a discussion with the owner And if the owner or the mediator would have a discussion with the owner, and if the owner says, yeah, I'm willing to mediate, that file would be pulled from the docket and the parties would go into a separate area and mediate the case. And in most instances, they'll settle that case, won't even have to come back before me.
That's great. And again, just for people unfamiliar with the legal process, that outcome that we're looking at, you mentioned how, maybe if they came to housing court, mediation might have a better outcome for people. In what ways?
Because they're able to resolve the case on their own terms without me making a recommendation that may not be beneficial to either one. The magistrate's decisions in the court orders are bare bones in saying you have until yada yada date to vacate the property. But if you mediate, you can say, look, I can be out in 14 days. Give me that amount of time. It's better to work these things out between the parties than to have a jurist make the decision.
So we see you belong to the Democratic Party.
Yes.
As Ohio holds, you belong to whatever party you voted in the primary most recently of. After the last election, the Democratic establishment decided that it wanted to pursue a more moderate, conservative position in an attempt to win more elections. Do you agree with the Democratic establishment?
As a judicial candidate, it's a nonpartisan race. And so I would prefer not to go into the minutia of what's happening in the party at this time.
Should have said this first. Although this is a nonpartisan local race, judges at all levels have been instrumental in slowing the fascist takeover by MAGA policies. If elected, what would you do to keep our small corner of the U.S. democratic and just?
Being fair and following the law. As a jurist, that is my role, to follow the law. My world is limited to that when I hear a case. So whatever else is going on out there, the only thing I am required to do is follow the law.
And then the last question, which is, I think, probably going to be easiest. Is there anything you want voters to know about you that we haven't covered?
Well, October 7th, early voting begins. So I want people to remember my name, Cheryl Wiltshire. I am running for Cleveland Housing Court Judge. And the big day is November 4th. And again, remember my name. I want people to do the research. And we tend to do that with non-judicial candidates. But when it comes to judicial candidates, we are either ignored or no one really pays attention to what's happening in the courthouse. So I want people to, in making a decision, do the research. The decisions that we as jurists make are public. So get online, ask questions. That's important to the political process. So just do the work, do the homework. I am not a Clevelander. Per se, I came to Cleveland in the late 1997 for law school, and after law school, decided to stay in Cleveland. I've made Cleveland my home, and I plan to continue living in Cleveland. I'm an owner, I'm a renter, and I'm not running because it's the thing to do as an attorney. I'm running because I'm concerned about housing court. My history with housing court lends to my concern for it. So I just want people to know that that's why I'm doing this. And my goal is to improve the court, and improving the court improves housing stock in Cleveland.